taught the creative writing minor. He was also associate producer for the Brisbane Writers' Festival. In 2014, he won the Text Prize for Children and Young Adults Writing for his memoir, How to Be Happy, which was published this year. A funny, sad and serious memoir, How to Be Happy is David Burton's story of his turbulent life at high school and beyond. Feeling out of place and convinced that he is not normal, David has a rocky start. How to Be Happy tackles depression, friendship, sexual identity, suicide, academic pressure, love and adolescent confusion. It's a brave and honest account of one young man's search for a happy, true and meaningful life that will resonate with readers young and old. I've read it, it certainly did for me. In reading How to Be Happy, I was immediately transported to the awkward years in high school and struggles associated with that confusing period between childhood and adulthood, and also between school and uni, and then the time after uni and before you get your first full-time job. The time in which you are trying to work out who you are for the first time without immediate reference to your friends and family. I highly recommend giving it a read and handing it to those teens who are still in the midst of the confusion of that transitional period. So can you please join me in welcoming David to the stage?
Hello. How are you? You're all scattered far away with your shy librarian. But it's such a pleasure to be with you this morning. I am sadly not a performance poet, but I will embrace tangents and do so. And also, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end of the session. I want to thank so much PLPN for inviting me along today. It's a real honour to be amongst librarian company. Librarians are some of my favourite people. Librarians have changed my life as a young person and as an adult. So it's a real honour to be amongst you. When I was talking to Robin about the possible topic of what I could talk about, Robin started suggesting methods of connecting with young people, which I find to be quite a daunting topic, to be frank. However, here we go. So, hold on. Before I ended up working quite a lot with young people, which is something that I really didn't anticipate that I would do. It's not something that I thought, as a young person myself, would be a part of my career that I would embrace. Before I was an author, before I had released How to Be Happy, which is now about 2 or 3 months old, I was and still am a playwright. And part of being a young adult author or a playwright for youth in theatre, or indeed just an arts professional who needs to support his income in any way he can, is to talk to and teach teenagers. I've been doing that on and off now for 10 years. When I first graduated uni, I found my ability to talk to youth easily. I was 20 and I put on a bit of a show. I was the cool guy with a drama degree. I wore bright shirts. I had a beard. And I spat out all the pop culture references I could muster. I could harness their attention for a single period. Maybe 2. And I was all style and no substance, of course. And my lack of experience meant any wisdom I had to pass on was limited only to what I had learned at university. That is, how to speak Shakespeare, why poetry is totally cool, or why Carpe Diem is relatable to #YOLO. Still, I was happy. I would never become one of those stuck-up, out-of-touch adults that had occupied the majority of my adolescence. The speed at which this assertion left me was shocking, and let's be honest, a little bit sad. By the time One Direction came around, I had no idea who they were or where they had come from. I just knew I found them irritating, and I found their lack of chest hair suspicious. A student I was teaching had to inform me about the Divergent and Maze Runner series. I had no idea they existed, I had never heard of them. Indeed, it was another student who turned up to a drama class one day, shattered and sobbing over something called The Fault in Our Stars. I received a quick introduction and rushed home to read the works of John Green. Reading that made me a better writer, and made me better equipped to understand what young people were reading, but alas, it didn't make me a teenager again. I'm now 28. I may as well be dead. But, okay, I just want to get a few things off my chest, alright? because I don't think these kids in these schools today are like me when I was young. I remember us being friendlier. way less connected to our phones. It was before iPhones, so, you know, we looked up and we looked into people's eyes. We weren't nearly as shallow. We were way more respectful. We were kinder to our elders. Between the Kardashians' Call of Duty and Snapchat, this generation is buggered. Someone famous once said this better than I. He said, "What is happening to our young people? They disrespect their elders. They disobey their parents. They ignore the law. Their morals are decaying. What is to become of them?" That was Plato. Hesiod in the 8th century said the youth of today were reckless and impatient, and the future of the human race was absolutely stuffed. Not his words, I may add. Peter the Hermit in 1274 said the youth was self-centred, and on and on and on through history we can find these quotes. So I'm not going to spend much time today talking about the corrupting power of technology, or the unusual position that young people find themselves in at this particular point of history, because I don't think they're that special. I simply don't buy the fact that they are that corrupted. And these are people there are people in this room who are much better qualified to tell you about the latest technologies that connect young people to each other and to support services. Many of you are here. Indeed, it's a peculiar time to grow up, that is true. But so were the 70s, so were the 80s and 90s. It's always tough being young. You feel the world is against you, you want to make a place on the planet, but your parents are too busy being lame to care. And I want to emphasise this point because there's an impulse to dismiss the young people as having incredibly short attention spans and ADD and ADHD, and how can we get these young people to read and engage? I've been promoting the book the last couple of months, which means I've been travelling around the country. And I was in a regional library in regional Queensland, I won't say that, in a library, and I walked into this library to do a lesson with a workshop with older people about writing a memoir. And I walked into the young adult section that was in a corner, and I walked in and disturbed a crow that was nesting in the corner. And there were cobwebs. And I looked across and there was an ordinary kind of wall of young adult novels and a few comic books, and I congratulated the librarian there on her selection of comic books for young people, and she said, "Oh, I don't really like supplying that for them. I just think if we haven't engaged people when they're 13 with reading by that age, you know, why bother?" So I found that incredibly depressing and looked around and was not surprised at the fact that there was no one in her frickin' library. I think and I get this a lot, and it's so easy to become cynical, and I do it all the time as well when I walk into a drama classroom and every person under the age of 16 is attached to a phone. You go, how can we possibly compete for their attention? The argument that young people have shorter and shorter attention spans is to a certain extent backed up by research and so on. However, they are also the generation, don't forget, that proved the publishing industry wrong by selling 1 million copies of The Order of the Phoenix and sitting and reading it voraciously. They're a generation that will download podcasts and listen to interviews that go for 2.5 hours at a stretch because they love it. They will sit and watch video games streaming on Twitch live services. They will watch someone in Korea playing StarCraft 2 for 3 or 4 hours at a time. It isn't difficult, I would argue, to capture this audience's attention. It's just that we need to be very mindful about how we do that and the type of content. So I don't give much tread to this idea that they're buggered. I think that's the easy way out. That was one of my tangents that I embraced because I have the time. I'll get back to it. Sure. So, it's not like I'm qualified to make rules or anything, and I don't like rules, but here's the first rule about connecting with young people. And it's the first rule I learned when I was 20 and trying to be Mr. Cool. Don't pretend you're a teenager and you understand everything about them and where they're coming from. You're not a teenager and you don't understand. And thank God for that. Being a teenager is hard work and chaotic. It's only in retrospect that I begin to put a framework around the entire mess of my teenage years. I can now build some kind of narrative or story to make sense of it. My entire adolescence was framed by two questions. Who am I? And how do I get people to like me? Of course, as an adult, I have these questions answered and never think about them at any point ever. As an adult, my main questions are now, when is the next Rego due? And where can I find the wine? And why does One Direction have no chest hair? But as a teenager, who am I and how do I get people to like me were my driving questions. Who am I was an important one. I'd come from a small town country primary school where I knew absolutely everyone and knew where I fit in. And I was thrust into a large private high school in the city in my eyes, it was Toowoomba, but a city where I knew absolutely no one. Who was I in this chaotic mess? Because I instantly sensed that there was a social ladder going on and I didn't know how to interpret it. I knew a few things about the guy I wasn't. I wasn't the sporty, masculine jock, which may surprise you given my athletic form today. I knew I wasn't the dux of any particular subject. I was bright-ish, but not quite bright enough or bothered enough to get to the top of that particular pile. I was gangly, I had long limbs, I had a lot of hair on my legs, but mysteriously at that point, nowhere else on my body. And I didn't quite know who I was. I knew a few things about who I wasn't, but I didn't know where I fit in. One thing I did know about myself was that I loved stories. Loved them. From the age of 7, libraries were my favourite places on earth. And they still are. Wizard of Oz was the first book I read by myself. I still remember the fresh feeling of achievement that this gave me, as well as the hours of peaceful concentration I spent in careful study. The prepubescent years revealed some foundational spiritual texts for me. The words of people like Morris Gleitzman, Robin Klein, Andy Griffiths, who's done a few things since I was young. I don't know if you know that name, Andy Griffiths. Emily Rodder, also very small time, you may know Paul Jennings, John Marsden, the list goes on. This is not to mention the first time I watched Star Wars, the time I borrowed a VHS, which is media that you can touch. It exists, and you put it in a machine. I borrowed a VHS from my library called Doctor Who and the City of Death. Or even that time I discovered the dusty pile of comic books in the bottom of our hallway cupboard and was introduced to the X-Men. Before it had anything to do with Patrick Stewart or James McAvoy doing this. Note that I say I'm a fan of stories, not books, and there's a difference. I'm a big fan of books, absolutely, but books are no better or worse than comic books, movies, or television. They're all stories after all. They all create the conversation and inspire fan communities. They all satisfy that need for story that's a deep human instinct. Because of course I'm not the only fan of story. All human beings enjoy story. Even the most stubborn, illiterate teenager likes story. At any age, we all relish in a colleague or friend dishing out fresh gossip at lunchtime. Even a teenager who has never read before will be a fantastic storyteller at lunchtime. Oh my goodness, did you hear about Teresa? She's totally got the hot blah, blah, blah. What is that if not communal storytelling? It's exactly what we've been doing since the Stone Age. Not only is listening to story hardwired, storytelling is too. For example, I was in Woolworths the other day and I was walking through the fruit and, oh my goodness, I can see you, man, I love it. Walking through the fruit and vegetable section. And I noticed just out of the corner of my eye there was this old woman kind of following me, but she was picking up the exact groceries that I was picking up as I went, like just one kind of 2 steps behind me. And then we got to the mandarin kind of section and we stood at the mandarin and we reached over. Now, how many of you have made up the rest of your story in your head already? How many of you want to hear the end of the story? Yes. Too bad I made it up, there is no. But even that was 4 or 5 sentences. The instinct to complete a story, the instinct to tell a story and share a story is hardwired. Aristotle knew this, the ancient Greeks knew this. They embedded story inside their community. So don't make the mistake of thinking that teenagers are absent for it, because it is a deep human need. You know all of this, of course I'm preaching to the converted. We are all storytellers, and story themes. Some young people, particularly in a school environment, haven't been told